The intelligence officer's hand trembled on that fateful March morning in 1945 at Kanoya Air Base, Kyushu, as he examined reconnaissance photographs that would forever change how Japanese Naval Command understood their enemy. The grainy images from submarine I-47 revealed something that defied every assumption they held about warfare priorities. A concrete vessel with no visible armament, heavy refrigeration equipment, and multiple small craft conducting mysterious transfers. What they had discovered, though they didn't yet comprehend it, was America's $1 million floating ice cream factory producing 500 gallons per shift while Japanese forces scraped pine bark for aviation fuel. The irony was staggering and would have been comical if it weren't so devastating to Japanese morale. While 24 Yokosuka P-1 Y-1 Francis bombers sat ready for Operation Tan No. 2, their pilots, many with less than 50 hours of flight training, prepared to fly explosive-laden aircraft into the American fleet at Ulithi. What none of these kamikaze pilots knew was that they were attacking an enemy so industrially superior that they had dedicated an entire vessel to producing frozen desserts. As Japanese forces operated 34,000 distillation units in a desperate program to extract 3,000 barrels of fuel from pine root oil, employing 400,000 workers, including millions of school children, the Americans were casually manufacturing 5 tons of ice cream daily from a single converted army barge. The first hints of this incomprehensible reality had emerged through prisoner interrogations after the Battle of Lake Gulf in October 1944. When the carrier Zuikaku sank on October 25th, American destroyers rescued Japanese sailors from oil-slicked waters, pulling 862 officers and men to safety, while 842 crew members perished in the depths. These survivors, expecting execution according to their military indoctrination, instead received medical treatment and food that included something they had never encountered in their lives: frozen cream served in metal cups. One survivor's account, preserved in Allied interrogation files, captured the bewilderment perfectly. The American sailor brought me what he called ice cream. I had heard of this dessert, but never tasted it. Here, after the greatest naval battle in history, Americans were serving frozen desserts to enemies we had tried to kill moments before. Vice Admiral Takajiro Onishi, the brilliant and ruthless creator of the kamikaze special attack units, understood immediately that such reports had to be suppressed. His pilots needed to believe Americans were weak, unable to endure hardship, soft from peacetime luxury. How else could Japanese spirit overcome such obvious industrial superiority? The truth would destroy what remained of fighting morale among men who had already accepted death as their most likely fate. If Japanese pilots learned that their enemies were so confident, so abundant in resources that they could afford frozen luxuries during the most intense naval combat in history, the psychological foundation of kamikaze warfare would crumble. The most detailed Japanese observation came through submarine reconnaissance that December, when submarine I-47 under Commander Zenji Orita surfaced near Ulithi for periscope reconnaissance before launching Chiton-manned torpedoes. Orita, who commanded I-47 from July 10, 1944 through the war's end, conducting multiple special attack missions, recorded in his log at 0630 hours. Large concrete vessel observed approximately 80 meters, no armament, heavy refrigeration equipment on deck, multiple small craft conducting transfers. What he had spotted was the U.S. Navy's barge refrigerated large. The BRL converted from an Army concrete barge at a cost of $1 million, equivalent to $17.2 million in 2024 currency, a floating factory that produced 10 gallons of ice cream every 7 minutes, storing 2,000 gallons at 15 degrees Fahrenheit, operating continuously 24 hours daily, 7 days a week. By January 1945, Japan's situation had deteriorated beyond Western comprehension, a descent into material desperation that made their enemy's ice cream ship seem like hallucinations from another universe. Fuel was so scarce that the mighty battleship Yamato, pride of the Imperial Navy, could only conduct training exercises at anchor to conserve precious oil. The pine root oil program, employing those 34,000 distillation units and mobilizing 400,000 workers including millions of school children dragged from their studies, ultimately produced only 3,000 barrels of aviation fuel from 70,000 barrels of pine oil, less than what the U.S. Navy consumed in a single day of normal operations. The 343rd Naval Air Group, Japan's last elite fighter unit commanded by Captain Minoru Genda, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, struggled with severe malnutrition that affected combat effectiveness in measurable ways. Genda commanded this unit from January 15, 1945, tasked with clearing airspace for kamikaze operations, but his pilots reported night blindness from vitamin deficiency, reduced reflexes, and inability to withstand G-forces during combat maneuvers. Captain Genda himself wrote in operational reports that would later be captured by Allied forces, "My pilots' eyes fail them at night. Malnutrition has stolen their vision. They shake during combat maneuvers from weakness. Yet they face an enemy who grows stronger each day." The contrast reached its starkest expression in the kamikaze units preparing for their final missions, where pilots, many teenagers with 40 to 50 hours of flight training compared to the 500 hours standard before the war, received final meals of rice balls, dried fish, and ceremonial sake before their one-way missions. They wore seninbari, thousand-stitch belts sewn by women for spiritual protection, though everyone knew no cloth could protect against concentrated anti-aircraft fire. At Kanoya Air Base on March 11, 1945, kamikaze pilots wrote their death poems before boarding their aircraft, following a tradition that transformed impending death into spiritual transcendence. One pilot's poem, preserved in the Kanoya Air Base Museum today, reads, "Like cherry blossoms in the spring, let us fall pure and radiant." These young men died attempting to crash into ships at Ulithi, where USS Randolph CV-15 suffered damage at 2007 hours that evening when one Francis bomber successfully struck the carrier's stern, killing 25 sailors and wounding 105. The carrier was repaired in 3 weeks using 29 tons of structural steel, including I-beam salvage from a Japanese sugar mill on Saipan, during which time her crew consumed approximately 3,000 gallons of ice cream from base facilities. The psychological impact of this disparity, pilots dying in desperate attacks while their targets consumed frozen luxuries during repairs, encapsulated the fundamental inequality of resources that defined the Pacific War. Ulithi represented something beyond Japanese comprehension, a manifestation of industrial power that defied their understanding of what was possible during wartime. This tiny coral atoll, often omitted from pre-war maps due to its seeming insignificance, had been transformed into the world's largest naval facility. By March 1945, when the kamikaze attacks arrived in their desperate waves, 722 ships anchored in its lagoon, more vessels than the entire Japanese Navy ever possessed at its peak strength. This was the staging point for the Okinawa invasion, a logistical miracle that turned a duck in the Pacific into a floating industrial city. Base facilities at Ulithi defied Japanese understanding of warfare priorities in ways that seemed almost deliberately designed to demonstrate American abundance. Complete machine shops operated in floating dry docks, maintaining the fleet with manufacturing capabilities that exceeded many nations' entire industrial capacity. The fleet post office handled 20 tons of mail daily, ensuring that hundreds of thousands of servicemen remained connected to home. Movie theaters showed the latest Hollywood films, maintaining morale through entertainment that Japanese forces could never imagine having time or resources to provide. Baseball diamonds on Mogmog Island allowed recreation that kept men physically and mentally sharp. A bakery ship produced fresh bread continuously, ensuring that even the most basic comfort of warm bread remained available to the fleet. USS Abaton distilled seawater into fresh water while simultaneously baking pies, combining essential utility with luxurious comfort in ways that perfectly exemplified American industrial philosophy. But it was the ice cream barge that became legendary among American sailors, a symbol of their nation's ability to provide not just necessities, but genuine luxuries even in the middle of the most intense naval campaign in history. Destroyer crews whose ships lacked ice cream equipment would send boats with empty containers to the barge, returning with gallons of vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry ice cream. The barge served everyone equally, from admirals to seamen, creating democracy through dairy in the middle of a war zone. Japanese intelligence struggled to comprehend American supply priorities, their analysts reviewing captured documents and intercepted communications that seemed to describe an entirely different kind of military operation. Captain Tamechi Hara, Japan's most successful destroyer commander who survived all major battles from Pearl Harbor to war's end, later wrote about learning of American comfort provisions with a bewilderment that never fully faded. Hara commanded destroyers Amatsukaze and Shigeru, participating in 14 major engagements, witnessing the gradual decline of Japanese naval power firsthand. "We thought at first the intelligence was wrong," Hara wrote in his memoir, Japan Said Destroyer Captain. "Ships dedicated to ice cream while we scraped for fuel. It was incomprehensible that any navy would prioritize such luxury during total war." Naval intelligence officers reviewed intercepted American supply manifests that seemed to be written in code, so impossible did their contents appear. Surely ice cream mix meant ammunition, they reasoned. Chocolate syrup must indicate fuel oil. Strawberry topping obviously represented medical supplies. No military force would prioritize actual dessert ingredients during the most intense combat operations in naval history. But evidence accumulated relentlessly, each piece of intelligence confirming what seemed impossible. Prisoners consistently reported ice cream aboard every American vessel above destroyer size. Reconnaissance showed refrigerated vessels at every American base, and supply manifests consistently included tonnage for morale supplies that exceeded total Japanese food rations for entire fleets. Commander Mochitsuru Hashimoto of submarine I-58, who would later achieve infamy by sinking USS Indianapolis on July 30, 1945, provided the most detailed Japanese observations of American abundance during earlier reconnaissance missions. During periscope observations at American bases, he witnessed what seemed to violate every principle of wartime resource allocation. In his memoir, Sunk, The Story of the Japanese Submarine Fleet, 1941 to 1945, Hashimoto wrote with the wonder of a man describing an alien civilization. The Americans operated floating cities of abundance. While we counted our last torpedoes and rationed fuel by the liter, they maintained peacetime routines in wartime. This was strength we never imagined, the power to be comfortable during apocalypse. His executive officer recorded similar observations that challenged every assumption about warfare they had learned at the Naval Academy. "We saw sailors in lines at what appeared to be refreshment stands," he noted in reports later captured during the occupation. "Ships transferred not fuel or ammunition, but white containers we later learned contained ice cream. They fought a different war than we did." The implications were staggering. While Japanese submarines conducted desperate missions with carefully rationed supplies, their enemies maintained ice cream service as a routine part of naval operations. Japanese pilots shot down and rescued by Americans reported treatment that contradicted everything they had been told about American character and military culture. During Operation Kikusui, the 10-mast kamikaze attacks on Okinawa between April and June 1945, captured pilots provided remarkable testimony about their captors' behavior under fire. One pilot, captured after engine failure prevented his intended suicide attack, recorded in post-war interrogation files. "The destroyer conducted normal operations during our attack. No panic among the crew. Men at regular stations except gunners. White uniformed sailors continued serving food. The ship's routine continued. This was not the desperate enemy we expected." What these pilots witnessed, though they couldn't fully understand it at the time, was American confidence in their anti-aircraft defenses so complete that it allowed normal shipboard routines, including food service, to continue during kamikaze attacks. While Japanese pilots approached on their death missions, fueled by alcohol-diluted gasoline and sustained by their last rice balls, American sailors maintained ice cream service on deck, their calm efficiency during combat representing a level of military professionalism and resource abundance that Japanese forces had never imagined possible. By 1945, American ice cream production in the Pacific had reached industrial scales that dwarfed entire Japanese food programs, creating a statistical disparity so extreme it seemed fictional. The Navy barge at Ulithi alone produced 500 gallons daily, 10 gallons every 7 minutes, while Army ice cream barges, 3 vessels with combined capacity, produced 1,500 gallons daily. Every carrier, battleship, and cruiser had ice cream machines, with base facilities operating multiple plants per location. In 1943, 135 million pounds of dehydrated ice cream mix had been shipped globally by the Army Quartermaster Corps, supporting annual production of 80 million gallons for military consumption. Meanwhile, Japanese reality painted a picture of desperation so complete it bordered on the surreal. The pine root oil program's 3,000 barrels represented the total output from 34,000 distillation units operated by 400,000 workers. Aviation fuel reserves had dropped below 15 million barrels by 1945, while civilian calories fell from 2,000 pre-war to 1,680 by summer 1945. Tokyo rations reached a starvation level of 775 calories daily for 6 months in 1946, and pilot training was limited to 40 to 50 hours due to fuel shortages that made proper preparation impossible. For perspective that illuminated the vast gulf between the two forces, the entire Japanese military's daily rice ration for home island forces totaled less tonnage than American ice cream consumption in the Pacific Theater alone. This wasn't simply a matter of different priorities. It represented fundamentally different civilizational approaches to warfare itself. Admiral Chester Nimitz, personally approving the ice cream barge project, understood something that Japanese military hierarchy couldn't accept. That morale wasn't built solely on ideology and sacrifice, but on the tangible demonstration of a nation's care for its fighting men. In a classified memo that revealed his strategic thinking, Nimitz wrote, "The Japanese expect our men to endure their conditions and break. We will demonstrate that American industrial might extends to crew comfort. A sailor who knows his country can provide ice cream in combat fights with different confidence than one expecting only hardship." This philosophy extended throughout the Pacific Fleet in ways both large and small, creating a culture of abundance that permeated every aspect of naval operations. The USS Lexington incident at Coral Sea on May 8, 1942, where sailors raided ice cream stores before abandoning ship, became naval legend. Sailors literally scooped ice cream into their helmets before entering life rafts, demonstrating priorities that were incomprehensible to Japanese military culture built on suffering as virtue in preparation for glorious death. Japanese naval officers who learned about American ice cream operations through intelligence reports faced an impossible psychological dilemma. How could they maintain fighting spirit among their men when the truth would destroy morale? How could they explain that while Japanese sailors received 315 grams of rice daily when supplies were available, Americans consumed 5 tons of ice cream from a single barge? The information created a crisis of understanding that went to the heart of Japanese military philosophy. Rear Admiral Matomi Ugaki, who commanded battleship operations and would lead the final kamikaze mission on August 15, 1945, wrote in his diary after receiving intelligence reports of American comfort levels, "If such reports are true, we have misunderstood this war entirely. Spirit cannot overcome an enemy who brings luxury to battle." The admission represented a profound crack in the ideological foundation that sustained Japanese resistance. The information was classified above top secret, with officers who learned of it sworn to absolute silence. But truth has a way of seeping through walls of secrecy, spreading through the fleet in whispers and rumors that corroded morale more effectively than any propaganda campaign. Japanese radar operators and observers began noting B-29 bombers circling at high altitude for no apparent tactical reason. Their behavior puzzling until post-war evidence revealed the truth. Crews were making ice cream, mixing powdered milk, sugar, and cocoa in ammunition cans, using 50-degree below zero Fahrenheit temperatures at 30,000 feet to freeze the mixture while turbulence provided the churning action. This level of confidence, making desert over enemy territory, while Japanese fighters powered by pine root oil desperately climbed to intercept them, represented civilizational surplus applied to warfare in ways that transcended mere military advantage. While Japanese mechanics drained hydraulic fluid to burn as emergency fuel, American aircrews improvised ice cream makers at bombing altitude, their casual creativity in the face of danger illustrating the vast psychological gulf between the two forces. Operation Kikusui sent 10 massive kamikaze waves against the American fleet at Okinawa between April 6th and June 22nd, 1945, representing Japan's final desperate attempt to achieve victory through spiritual determination alone. A total of 1,465 kamikaze aircraft and 4,000 Japanese pilots died in these attacks, their sacrifice representing the ultimate expression of Bushido philosophy. Japanese pilots flew obsolete aircraft powered by alcohol-diluted fuel that reduced engine performance by 30%, their final meals consisting of rice balls and water, often their only substantial food in days. After the massive April 6, 1945 attack involving 355 kamikaze aircraft that sank 6 ships and damaged 22 others, American fleet reports noted with characteristic understatement. Morale remains high. Ice cream consumption increased 40% post-action. The psychological impact of ice cream after combat cannot be overstated in its importance to American fighting effectiveness. It represented normalcy, comfort, and connection to home in ways that sustained morale through the most intense combat operations. Japanese naval personnel captured at Okinawa, 11,250 surrendered in total, provided detailed accounts that shattered Japanese assumptions about American character and military culture. One destroyer officer, pulled from the water after his ship sank, reported through interpreters, "I expected torture, perhaps execution, the treatment we gave American prisoners. Instead, a young American sailor, younger than my youngest brother, brought me ice cream. Vanilla, in a metal cup. He seemed embarrassed they had run out of chocolate. I cried, not from gratitude, but from understanding we had already lost. A nation that provides ice cream to enemies had won before fighting began." These accounts, suppressed during the war but documented in occupation records, revealed that the gulf between the two forces exceeded anything Japanese command had imagined possible. During the occupation starting in August 1945, American forces distributed ice cream to Japanese children, many tasting it for the first time in their lives. The psychological impact proved profound, disproving everything the military government had told the Japanese people about American barbarism and weakness through the simple medium of frozen dessert. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, Japan's leading surviving ace with 64 confirmed victories, tasted ice cream for the first time at a U.S. Air Base in 1946. He later wrote in his memoir Samurai, "I understood finally why we lost. We fought believing suffering made us strong. They fought with the confidence of abundance. We thought comfort was weakness. They knew comfort was a right their industry could guarantee anywhere." The statistical reality of two different wars became clear in the final accounting, numbers that told the complete story of two nations fighting entirely different kinds of conflict. American production in 1945 included the Navy ice cream barge producing 500 gallons daily, 10 gallons every 7 minutes, while Army barges, 3 vessels, combined for 1,500 gallons daily. Total military ice cream production reached 80 million gallons annually, supported by 135 million pounds of dehydrated mix shipped globally in 1943 alone. Equipment was standardized. Every ship above destroyer size had ice cream machines, at a cost of $1 million per barge, $17.2 million in 2024 currency. Japanese reality in 1945 painted a starkly different picture. Rice rations of 315 grams per sailor when available. Pine root oil totaling 3,000 barrels from 70,000 barrels of pine oil. 400,000 workers mobilized for the pine root program. 34,000 distillation units deployed nationwide. Pilot training had been reduced to 40 to 50 hours versus 500-plus hours pre-war, while fuel quality declined to 30% alcohol mixture that reduced engine performance significantly. For Japanese military culture built on Bushido, the way of the warrior and acceptance of suffering as spiritual purification, American ice cream ships represented something incomprehensible that challenged every assumption about warfare, strength, and national character. Americans saw comfort not as weakness, but as a strength multiplier, abundance not as decadence, but as strategic advantage, luxury not as corruption, but as proof of civilizational superiority. Captain Mitsuo Fuchida, who led the Pearl Harbor attack and survived the war, later converted to Christianity and became a pacifist. When asked about his transformation, he explained, "I learned Americans fed ice cream to their enemies. Not just food, luxury food. This was not the barbaric enemy we were told about. This was a civilization so confident in victory they could afford kindness and comfort during war." The ice cream ships challenged every assumption about warfare that Japanese military culture held sacred, representing a fundamental difference in how the two nations understood power, victory, and human nature itself. At a 1985 U.S.-Japan veteran reunion in Hawaii, the cultural gap remained evident 40 years after the war's end. Former CB Robert Mitchell, who had worked on the Ulithi base, was asked about the ice cream barge by Japanese veterans who still struggled to understand its significance. Mitchell shrugged with typical American casualness. "We figured boys fighting needed ice cream. Didn't seem special at the time. It was just what you did, take care of the troops. If we could build it, why wouldn't we?" This casual attitude that ice cream was so normal, so expected that its provision in wartime seemed unremarkable, illustrated the gulf between the navies better than any battle statistics or casualty figures. Former kamikaze pilot trainer Tadamasa Itatsu, who attended the reunion, responded with the wonder of someone still trying to comprehend an alien philosophy. "We trained boys to die with empty stomachs. You trained boys to live with full stomachs and dessert." This difference explains everything about the war. Dr. John Dower, in his Pulitzer Prize-winning Embracing Defeat, Japan in the Wake of World War II, wrote that the ice cream barge at Ulithi was worth more than a fleet of battleships as a demonstration of American power. It said, "We can afford this. We have already won. We are simply waiting for you to realize it." Military historian Richard Frank noted, "Japanese forces fought expecting to die gloriously. American forces fought expecting to live comfortably. This wasn't just a different strategy. It was a different civilization's approach to warfare." Today, at the Kanoya Air Base Museum in Kagoshima Prefecture, a memorial to the kamikaze pilots who flew from this base includes a small, often overlooked placard mentioning American ice cream ships. Added in the 1990s, it provides context for understanding the impossible disparity these pilots faced. The museum displays a kamikaze pilot's final meal, a small rice ball, pickled vegetables, and a cup of sake, next to a photograph of the American ice cream barge at Ulithi obtained from U.S. Navy archives. No explanation is needed. The image tells the entire story of the Pacific War in ways that words cannot fully capture. Museum curator Takeshi Yamada explained the display's purpose. "We added this exhibit because visitors, especially young people, couldn't understand how we lost so completely. When they see that America built ships just for ice cream while we scraped pine trees for fuel, they understand it wasn't just military defeat. It was the collision of scarcity with abundance." The story of Japanese commanders discovering American ice cream ships reveals the fundamental nature of power in modern warfare that transcends mere military technology or tactical superiority. Japan believed power came from spirit, from will, from the ability to endure unlimited suffering in service of the emperor and nation. America demonstrated that true power came from the ability to eliminate suffering, to provide abundance, to maintain normalcy even in extremity. The kamikaze pilots, noble in their sacrifice and unwavering in their dedication, flew into an enemy fighting a fundamentally different kind of war with different assumptions about human nature and national strength. While Japan scraped pine roots for fuel, producing 3,000 barrels from 34,000 distillation units in a program that employed nearly 500,000 people, America built million-dollar ice cream barges as routine logistics support. While Japanese pilots wrote death poems before their final flights with 50 hours of training on diluted fuel, American sailors chose between vanilla and chocolate flavors. While Japan measured victory in spiritual terms and glorified suffering as character building, America measured success in industrial output that included the continuous production of ice cream at 10 gallons every 7 minutes. The war ended not when Japan ran out of pilots willing to die. They never did, maintaining their willingness to sacrifice until the emperor himself commanded surrender. It ended when Japanese leadership finally understood what they were fighting against. Not just military might or superior technology, but a society so powerful it could dedicate ships to dessert production, so confident it saw comfort as essential rather than luxury, so abundant it could afford to be wasteful with luxury items while fighting a global war on multiple fronts. In the final analysis, the statistics tell the complete story with mathematical precision. American ships at Ulithi numbered 722, while Japanese ships in the entire Navy at peak strength totaled approximately 700. American ice cream production reached 500 gallons per shift from one barge, while Japanese aviation fuel from pine roots totaled 3,000 barrels despite massive national effort. American bomber crews made ice cream at 30,000 feet over enemy territory, while Japanese pilots received 40 to 50 hours of training on diluted fuel. American sailors complained about ice cream flavors during combat operations, while Japanese sailors received 315 grams of rice when supplies were available. Japanese commanders who discovered that America had ships dedicated solely to making ice cream discovered something more profound than military intelligence about enemy capabilities. They discovered they were fighting an enemy who had already won, who knew they had won, and who were so certain of victory they brought dessert to the apocalypse. The ice cream ships proved what the atomic bombs only confirmed. Japan was fighting the last war of scarcity against the first war of abundance, and the outcome was as inevitable as it was incomprehensible to those who believed suffering was strength. They learned too late that true strength in modern warfare was having so much power you never had to suffer at all. The $1 million ice cream barge at Ulithi, producing its 10 gallons every 7 minutes while Japanese pilots prepared to die in desperate attacks, was not just a ship or even a symbol. It was proof of a civilization that had already won the war before the first shot was fired, demonstrating victory through abundance rather than achieving it through sacrifice. In their world of bitter pine root fuel and desperate sacrifice, American ice cream ships were not just incomprehensible, they were proof that Japan had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the war they were fighting. They had brought spirit to a contest of industrial abundance, suffering to a battle against comfort, and scarcity to fight against plenty. In that fundamental mismatch of civilizational approaches to warfare, they had already lost before they began.